Welcome everybody to The Green Dream. This is where I talk to a lot of influential and important people in the world of what we call sustainable and ESG investing. We're going to dig into some of the issues, both from an asset management perspective and based on how people view these issues in their own life. So I'm joined today by Sophie Outhwaite from Stanhope Capital. Sophie, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. Very good to see you. Very good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I sort of rambled through that in the introduction. Sustainable investing, ESG investing. If you're sort of describing perhaps to friends who maybe get a bit confused by the kind of the names, the expressions, how do you sort of explain it?
So I think for me the simplest way of thinking about it is thinking about the future, investing for the future. So if you're thinking about a company, you want to know, will it still be here and going strong in 10 years' time? And you have to consider environmental, social and governance issues for that company, and the company has to be thinking about them, because if they're not, they're very unlikely to be efficient enough to thrive in the long term.
So not be sustainable.
Not be sustainable, and it's really about taking a holistic approach to risk. So thinking about these are just additional risk factors for the company. And analysts were always very good, and sort of fundamental stock pickers who are choosing companies from the bottom up were always very good at thinking about corporate governance and how that might impact a company. And now they're starting to realise that environmental and social factors can also have a financial impact on a company.
So if you're following on from that, how do you sort of integrate ESG, sustainable screening into your investment process?
Okay, so Stanhope are almost exclusively invested in funds. So for us, considering ESG factors is about looking at how our underlying fund managers are incorporating ESG into their processes. And for us to say something is integrating ESG, we have to see that their analysis on these factors are impacting their decisions whether or not to hold a stock, a target price for a stock, or the quantity they're holding a stock. And typically, you should be able to see this mechanism by which this is occurring. And if you can't, we wouldn't say it was integrating ESG, even if it does on the label.
And why do you think ESG has become sort of so popular in the sort of last 5 years? Because if we were having this conversation sort of 5 years ago, I wouldn't have been asking the same questions, and it might have been relevant in certain cases, but not as broadly as it is now.
Yeah, I think there are a few factors, but sort of social awareness and pressure has really, really risen over the last few years. There's never been more content available, which makes us think about our planet and how our choices have a consequence. And that very quickly feeds through to people thinking about how their investments have consequences. And there's pressure on individuals and companies to think about how they're investing, as well as on companies to reduce the sort of pollution or the waste that they produce and all the negative externalities from their way they're operating, and to either internalize the costs or to reduce the problem in the first place. But this is also in the context of a wonderful framework is developing and has taken on a pace over the last 5 years. So things like the Principles for Responsible Investment, which are a little older than that, but the Sustainable Development Goals and before the Millennium Development Goals, all of this is helping companies to learn how better they can behave, and also for investment companies to come up with products to meet demand for cleaner portfolios.
Yeah. And what more do you think the asset management industry could do to make it sort of clearer to, I mean, clearly you're an expert, so you follow it, so you understand, but when I talk to private investors, a lot of them sort of go, well, I don't really understand what sustainable means and what ESG means. Is one of them green and is one of them something sort of different? Is there something that the asset management industry could do to kind of make that a bit clearer to people?
Yeah, I've heard quite a few people talk about, can we not come up with some sort of standard labels for things that everyone understands the definition of? But it's a bit sort of like food nutrition. You know, you come up with a system and it doesn't necessarily answer everybody's questions, and then the next thing you know, a scientist is coming out and saying, but these aren't any of the things you're supposed to be thinking about.
So like the amount of wine we're allowed to drink?
Exactly, it's definitely a glass a day, but that's exactly the kind of thing. And I think it's probably too soon, and you might stifle sort of innovation in the area if you start labelling things at this stage. So what I do think is, particularly for retail investors who are just private investors just looking for things, having an ESG label isn't particularly helpful. What you really need is an explanation, and I know it's wordy, but it should be available and obvious. It should say, this is what we mean by ESG integration. It doesn't have to be an industry standard, but this is what we are doing. This is what we will and won't hold. We will or won't hold tobacco. We will or won't at what revenue level for the company. Just be very clear. But it has improved a lot over the last few years, but I still find it quite hard to find that information sometimes.
Interesting. So, as you say, greater clarity and making it easier for somebody like yourself to find it. I mean, when I look on people's websites, I'm kind of digging around, and unless it's a bespoke ESG group, obviously it's forefront. It is quite hard, isn't it?
I feel that some of the active fund managers are better in the space than the passives. So even where you've got a fantastic product, so the UBS socially responsible ETF range is fantastic, but on their fact sheet it says we're following this socially responsible index. And it doesn't go into the detail a lot of investors would probably want to see. So they could do more to show how good they are.
Now, a big part of the whole debate has become statistics, sort of facts that perhaps make us want to change our life. Sort of, what are your do you have a favourite sort of sustainability fact or statistic?
They're not particularly snappy, but I think one of the things I've been really surprised by is copper. And how important copper is. So copper mining, it's incredibly carbon intensive. So it would automatically be ruled out of a lot of sustainable strategies, a lot of things targeting lower carbon. But actually copper is an essential part of our transition to a cleaner economy. So renewable energy, power plants use sort of 4 to 6 times that of conventional power plants, and electric vehicles use huge amounts more copper than petrol or diesel cars. And so that I found really surprising, that we're also screening it out in a lot of areas, when actually I think an engagement process is going to be necessary instead of divestment there. And the other one would be the fashion industry and how energy consumptive the fashion industry is. So it's it was apparently worse than airline and shipping combined. That's crazy. That's huge, and we've sort of come into this culture of very fast fashion. I've happily owned this dress for about 10 years, but it's really something that people need to think about and slow down with. Okay,
lovely. And on a personal level, how would you describe your sort of sustainability credentials? I know you think a lot about the sort of food and stuff that you consume on one level.
I think I'm getting there. So it's something I think about a lot. I've thought about it a lot over the last few years, and my thinking's constantly evolving in this space. So, one day I'm happy with plastic. Last year I bought Christmas presents throughout the year, and at the start of the year I'm buying plastic throwaway items, and by the end of the year I'm absolutely not buying plastic throwaway items. I think everything's in transition. When you've decided to cut out single-use plastic, you don't go and throw away your shampoo. You finish your shampoo and then you look for a plastic-free alternative. So I'm somewhere on that journey in my life, and probably in my personal investments as well. But I do feel very lucky because in my day-to-day job, Stanhope are very supportive of clients who want to bring their portfolios in line with their beliefs and their values. And so I get to do a lot to ensure that is possible by selecting funds that can align with investors' sort of more socially conscious thinking. And so I'm very pleased that my sort of personal feelings about this aren't in conflict with that of my employer, which I'm not sure everyone in my position can say.
Lovely. And just following on from that, because I think you kind of touched on there, a lot of these decisions are not as kind of black and white and simple as it would be great if it were. So, personal choices: paper bag or plastic bag, electric car or no car. Where would you stand on those?
So with the bag thing, it's quite interesting. I've had a lot of people recently sort of saying, "Oh, but paper bags use so much more energy to recycle than plastic bags," and this. And I just think you're missing the point. The problem with the plastic bag is not that, of course, it's cheap and easy to make, and no, it's not recyclable, but it was cheap and easy to make. That's why plastic's so good. That's why it's so hard to give up. But the problem is that plastic bag will still be here in 500 years. The paper bag will not be. Even if you recycle it several times, it will not be. And it's sort of missing the problem with plastic is that it doesn't go away. It breaks down into tiny bits of plastic that we're full of. Cars is a sad one. We were in the market for a car last year. very quickly realised a new car was not an option. So looking at the second-hand car market, and there was nothing in the electric market space that was in our price range that met our needs. So looking for a family car.
Yeah.
And I was really disappointed. And that was before we even started to think about the complications of there are no charging points at home.
Yes.
And they're not too expensive to put in, especially compared to the cost of a car, but that is still something you'd need to organise and arrange. And there are also no charging points at the places we go in the car. You know, I go visit my aged aunts in Sudbury and they don't have a charging point.
Yes.
So what happens there? So I think, and we ended up with an EcoBoost engine, which is a petrol engine, but a very efficient one.
Yeah.
So car tax has come right down, but not to zero,
Yeah.
which was the idea.
So, kind of getting towards the end, I'm sure you'll be relieved. You've got a choice of a cup of tea or coffee, sustainably produced, obviously, or something else, with Greta Thunberg, Sir David Attenborough, or somebody else. Who would it be and why?
Okay. So I have huge amounts of admiration for Greta and Sir David, but I would probably choose Ellen MacArthur.
Ah, yes.
Ellen MacArthur set up her foundation, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, in 2010, I think.
Yes.
And it's all about accelerating the transition to a circular economy. And a circular economy is one where there is, you know, as close to zero waste and pollution as possible.
Yes. And
it's a brilliant concept. It's that we've sort of come up in a world where we believe that, you know, to produce a mug has a necessary evil of this is the byproducts of this process. And actually what this foundation says is, no, we could have designed that mug in a way that there was no waste.
Yes.
And you can do it to existing products and business models, and you can do it to new products and business models. And they're working with governments and businesses to sort of promote this idea.
And I think her foundation is the one that came up with the statistic that we'll have more plastic bottles in the ocean than fish in the next couple of years, as opposed to their research, which is one of my favourite sort of stats, which you well know. And we get to the end. So it's the question about why this is called the Green Dream. So if you had a green dream, I'm sort of calling it, to make the world a better place from a sort of an environmental perspective, kind of what would it be?
I wish it wasn't so unrealistic, but I really think that we need some kind of global agreement on carbon reduction and waste management.
Yeah.
But it also needs to be followed up by legislation. There's a lot of talking going on, but there's not a lot of legislation, and governments are very quick to blame consumers. You know, we're all feeling terrible every time we're caught short without our keep cup to get a coffee. Yeah. The governments should have sorted that out. There should be no such thing as a sort of plastic hybrid cup that we can't recycle, or a system that does this. And you need legislation, and it needs to be global and agreed and followed up.
Sophie, thank you very much for coming in. Really
Thank you very
enjoyed
much.
talking to you about this, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again in the future.
Thank you very much.